This is Magic and Mortar. Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad you're here to watch this DIY tutorial where I'll show you how I make these wooden fortress walls. This tutorial marks the beginning of a series where I'll be showing you how to make an entire village, things like cornfields and different structures. If that interests you, be sure to subscribe so you know when the next video is going live. Thank you again for hanging out with me today. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so you may have guessed that our wooden fence we're going to be building here is made out of wood. A lot of the products we're using are going to be wood products, like these 2.5-inch long craft sticks that I have in my hand here. You don't have to use the exact items that I am using, okay? Because it's made out of wood, you have a lot of wiggle room here. You could use popsicle sticks, even toothpicks, whatever you have on hand. We're really just going to be looking at what is important, and that is the assembly. So the order in which we put things together, how we put them together, and how we finish everything with our detail work in the end. To begin, go ahead and lay out whichever material you've chosen to work with. So for me, it's going to be these craft sticks. You want to lay them on a flat surface. This is going to form the front of our wall. So if you'd like a longer or a shorter wall, just simply adjust by adding or removing the material. In preparation for the next step, we want to straighten our row of craft sticks. I had some leftover bamboo skewers, so I'll use those to help straighten my wall. Now we want to connect all of our craft sticks together so they begin to form one piece. To do this easily, we need a piece of material that runs the entire length of our fence. I have the bamboo skewers on hand, so that's what I'll be using. Again, you can use whatever you need. Go ahead and lay out the bamboo skewer on top of your craft sticks and then mark the length that you need with a Sharpie. Using a hot glue gun, run a bead of hot glue across one side of the bamboo skewer. Firmly press the bamboo onto your craft sticks and hold in place until the hot glue has a chance to dry. You will repeat this step with a second length of bamboo. The same process, just glue it, press it down, and hold it. I do want you to notice here the bamboo skewers are not placed exactly in the same spots. That straight edge of the fence towards the top of the screen is going to be the bottom of my fence, so I glued that support very close to the bottom. The side of the fence that's closest to us is going to be the top of the fence, and you'll see that I've left room between that support and the top of the fence, just to make it look a little bit more natural. Because there are so many individual craft sticks here, some of them just will not hold onto the hot glue like we'd hope. Just add a little line of crazy glue to help secure all of those sticks in place. Next, I'm going to be adding 2 more lengths of bamboo to the back of the wall. We'll be doing this in a crisscross fashion. Again, just hot gluing the bamboo and then pressing down, firmly holding until it dries in place. This will help to hold all the craft sticks in place even more, as well as strengthen the overall piece. Aesthetically, it will move us forward closer to what the finished product of the wall is going to look like. Using a pair of scissors, just trim off any excess bamboo that's hanging off the back of the wall. Alright, now we are ready to start basing our wall. The very first step here is to get the wall attached to some styrofoam. Using a marker, I'm simply marking the length of styrofoam I need to base my wall. Using one of my favorite tools, the hot wire cutter here, go ahead and finish cutting that measured block of styrofoam out. We want to form a bit of a recess for our wall, so go ahead, line the wall up with the styrofoam, grab something to write with, mark down the edges there, and then using that hot wire cutter, we're going to melt away that recess that we can set the wall down into. Using a hot glue gun, you're going to pipe a bunch of hot glue into that recess. When you've got a fair amount in there, go ahead and pick up the wall and then press it firmly down into the block of styrofoam there. Go ahead and hold that in place, giving the hot glue a chance to dry. You're going to want to be careful here when it's drying that you hold it upright. If you're not careful, the wall can lean one way or the other, and then it will be stuck like that pretty well. Next, you just want to trim off any of that excess styrofoam. We're going to be mounting this onto a piece of wood in just a moment. Anything that you don't want on the final product, go ahead and start trimming that off now. I'm going to be basing this on a piece of basswood. You can pick this up at your local craft store. It is a soft wood. It's still pretty hard. It's going to give us the durability that we want here. It is just soft enough to carve and shape. Go ahead and trace that styrofoam outline on the top of that wood there. One tip, if you are going to cut through this wood, if you do the majority of your cutting along the grain, the lengthwise here, I'm trying to utilize as much grain of the wood as possible. It is much easier to cut through if you're following that. You can see there just a few passes of the X-Acto knife, and it's pretty well easy enough to snap right off there. Using a hot glue gun, we are ready to attach the wall to that basswood that we've cut out. Go ahead and apply hot glue to the bottom of the styrofoam piece there, line it up with the wood the best you can, and then press it firmly and hold it in place, give that hot glue a chance to dry. Now that the pieces are attached securely, go ahead and pick up a blade and start trimming off any excess that you don't want or that just didn't line up properly. If the blade's sharp enough here, you can cut right through the wood with no problem, so it shouldn't be any tricks here. Go ahead and just shape it however you want. Alright, one final step and then we'll be done with the assembly of our piece. Remember, this is meant to be a fortified wall to a village or a settlement, so we need to add a couple supports to the back here. We're going to beef this thing up, make it look like nobody can break in. Go ahead and grab a couple bamboo skewers, mark off the length that you need. We're going to trim these and then simply hot glue to the back of our wall. Alright, on to my favorite step here. I do this with nearly every single one of my pieces. We're going to be adding a layer of all-purpose joint compound. This is going to help to do a few things, right? It's going to unify the materials for the base. It's going to tie everything together. It's going to give us a little bit more texture that we can work with when we're making the ground elements around the fence. It's also going to provide just another additional layer of strength and integrity to the piece. It's going to make it really physically strong. Remember, when we are applying this here, we don't want to get too much onto the fence. The fence is made of wood, and that's the way we like it, so we don't need to alter that in any way. After you get this applied to the base there, you want to give this about 24 hours to dry, so just be aware of that. Now we are ready to begin painting, and then we'll move on to our finishing touches. So for the base coat here, you could spray paint this on if you'd like. I chose to brush on my base coat just because of all the nooks and crannies. I don't think that a spray coat would have evenly distributed in all the cracks there. For the base coat here, I am simply using an acrylic burnt umber color. Now for this next layer of paint, we are using another simple acrylic. This color is called Burnt Sienna. For this layer of paint, we do want it to go on fairly thick and we want good coverage. So use plenty of paint on your brush, but don't go out of your way to push this layer of paint into the cracks. We already have that darker burnt umber, that undercoat there. We can utilize that color, that layer of paint as a shadow if we're careful here while we apply the Burnt Sienna. Again, you don't want to push this as hard as you can. You do want good coverage, but go ahead and leave the darker cracks the way they are. Alright, now we're going to move on to some highlights. For the highlights here, again, we're using another acrylic color. This is a nutmeg brown, and we're going to go ahead and mix that with a pretty good amount of white. Alright, and we're going to be using a dry brush technique. So after you've got the color mixed on your palette and you've got it applied to your brush, you're going to dab all that paint out onto a washcloth. After you've got the brush nice and dry, you're just going to go ahead and apply it all over the model here, and what it's going to do, it's going to highlight and pick up all of the very abrupt edges, and it's going to add a lot of depth and realism to your piece. Wanting to add a little bit of brightness and warmth to the piece, but in a very subtle manner, I went ahead and just dry brushed on a very warm yellow acrylic here. This was a color I blended myself, so I don't have anything else to go off of, other than I just wanted it to be a very subtle touch of a warm yellow color here. Now this next step here is a really fun step. I'd encourage anyone that's trying to do crafts at home, if you're just getting into it, or even if you've been doing it a long time, as with any form of art, whatever you're passionate about, remember, have fun with it. And with these pieces here, we want to try to tell a story, right, with our pieces. So for this step here, these are supposed to be fortified walls that are protecting, a village, some kind of settlement. And so what I've done is I've diluted some red acrylic with water. I've dipped my finger into that mixture and I'm just flicking it onto the wood wall here. We're making a blood splatter effect up against the wall. Now that diluted red paint, when that dries, it might look like a lot right now. When that dries, it's going to be very transparent. Those blood stains are going to look very old. So now what I'd encourage you to do, and what I've done with my piece, is I've dipped my finger into some red acrylic paint that isn't diluted. It's just the regular old paint, and I'm going to flick on just a couple, 2 or 3 really vibrant red stains onto the wood here. Alright, so that wraps up the painting phase for our project here. If you're not happy, you can go back and touch it up, but I really like the way ours turned out. So we're moving on to our flocking. We're going to flock the base. For the base of our item here, I'm going to leave it nice and brown. It's going to kind of look like mud if it happens to stick through in any one area, and I'm fine with that. When I'm flocking, I always reach for Mod Podge. You can use PVA glue. It's just like a white Elmer's glue. Any kind of school glue is fine. I personally reach for the Mod Podge because it's designed to not interfere with inks and pigments. So if you're trying to flock a painted surface, I trust Mod Podge over any other items to get that first layer down. Alright, so now I'm going to be flocking with this medium brown ballast here. This is a Woodland Scenics product. I trust them as well, and I use a lot of their flocks. So I went ahead and Mod Podged just around the base of the wooden wall here, where I'll be applying the gravel. So all I'm doing is I'm simply just shaking the gravel out onto the Mod Podge area, and it will stay there. It is a good idea to put something underneath your piece so that when you are flocking, you can prevent some messy cleanup, but also you can kind of hold on to and save some of this product that's kind of spilling out over the edge. Now, just like our painting, we want to flock in different layers, different stages, and use different materials and such to make it look as real as possible. So for our next layer, I'm going to be applying grass, right? And what I've done here is I've applied Mod Podge to all the areas I want to affect, even up on the gravel like you can see right now. I want to make more of a transition so it isn't such a stark contrast from gravel into grass. So it's okay to apply more of that Mod Podge onto an area that's already been flocked if you're trying to make more of a smooth transition. I've applied my layer of Mod Podge, and now I'll be adding the static grass flock to the piece. Now, the proper way to use the static grass here is when used with an applicator, it will actually statically charge the synthetic pieces of grass, and they will stand up on end when they hit the model piece there. For our purposes, it doesn't matter so much for what we're trying to accomplish right now, and I will show you why in just a moment when we move on to the next flock here. Now, I'd like to address a problem with the model piece here where we have too much hot glue that's on the back of the piece here. You can see how obvious the glue is. It's taking away a little bit from the piece itself. So what I like to do is I just cover those problem areas up with some tree moss, right? Now, this is a synthetic tree moss here. I believe I picked this up from the dollar store. You can go there if you'd like. They do have a lot of good options for you for very cheap. Just be aware that you do suffer. You lose a little bit of quality from the Dollar Tree, but it's just a fantastic budget build. So please consider it on your next projects. When you're covering up these trouble areas, I do use hot glue. I apply it very carefully. I try to get my plants, my tree moss in place here, and then after I've got it nice and secure, I'll reach for my X-Acto knife and I will trim up any of the hot glue that is obvious. And then if you do this process and you follow these steps and you're very careful about it, you can really clean up extremely well any ugly looking hot glue areas. Alright, so after that little intermission, we are back to our flocking here. Now what I'm applying here to that tree moss that we've just put on the model piece and to that static grass that we flocked, what I do is I take a very thinned out Mod Podge. So it's Mod Podge that's even thinner. I've added more water to it, and I will actually apply this to the grass everywhere over the model. And this is why I didn't necessarily need to use a static applicator because I'm just going to flatten the grass either way. This step will help to solidify all of that flock and foliage we just added to the piece. When the glue dries here, the entire piece will be very solid and nothing should fall off. One last step with the flock here, just like when we were painting and like I was mentioning earlier, when you're flocking, you want to have more layers and more colors as well to make everything look as natural as possible. So that PVA glue, that watered down Mod Podge that we just added, while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and take some blended turf woodland scenic flock here, and we're going to go ahead and apply very gently, just sprinkle that onto the edges, and then go ahead and blend that in with the green blend and then with the earth blend as well. Now, the very last step that I chose to do here was to add some damage to this wooden wall, this barrier that we just created, so that now when this piece is on the table and it's used in some sort of game or campaign or whatever, the players can look at it and really get a feel for the story, right? The story behind it, the impenetrable village or the first settlement in a far-off land that had to fight barbarians, whatever it might be. So they look at this fence and it's damaged and bloodied from battle, and you can just have so much fun creating pieces like this, and then you can have even more fun putting them to use in whatever scenario you've created, and you can really take pride in your craftsmanship. You guys, thank you so much again for being awesome and watching my videos. I seriously appreciate every one of you 58 subscribers. You guys are the best. I hope I'll see you again at the next video. Take it easy. Thank you.